New Orleans Saints at the Atlanta Falcons. Boys, we are sitting right now 5 to 5.5 point favorites are the New Orleans Saints on the road against the Atlanta Falcons. We're looking at a total of about 42.5 or 43. I don't need to tell you what's going on in New Orleans. You already know. Doesn't look like Alvin Kamara is going to be suspended, at least for the beginning of the season here. We don't know how things are going to look a little bit further down the line, but he's going to be out there. Michael Thomas looks to be progressing. He looks to be out there. Jameis Winston also progressed from his injury. He's going to be out there for this Saints team. And then, of course, they go out and draft Chris Olave. They signed Jarvis Landry. So this is going to be a pretty new look offense for the Saints. You saw a little bit of Jameis and Kamara last year together before Jameis got hurt, but that's about it. On the Falcons side of things, Marcus Mariota is going to be taking over at quarterback, at least for the first few weeks. We'll see how it goes from there. They're going to have to eventually see what they have in Desmond Ridder, but we will figure out somewhere along the way what week to identify where they might be making that quarterback change. But Marcus Mariota takes over. Of course, Calvin Ridley suspended for the year, so that's a bad thing when it comes to weapons for him. Kyle Pitts, one of the highest graded rookies ever at the tight end position, and honestly, he's basically just a gigantic wide receiver for them. And then, of course, they go out and draft Drake London. That's about it from a real splash standpoint for this Falcons team, projected to be one of the worst teams in all of the NFL. And since you're joining us and since you're new, Adam, let's go ahead and kick things off here. Saints on the road at the Falcons, about 5.5 point favorites.
Matthew, you as a Saints fan, I think, will have to be the one to talk me down a little bit here, because I see a lot of things I like about the Saints, and I see a lot of things I like about the Saints, I think, more than the market does at this point. When I was putting together my initial numbers for the season, I get it's a rosy case if I'm saying Alvin Kamara is there, if I'm saying Jameis Winston is going to be more of the 30 touchdown than the 30 interception guy. I think in some ways we've forgotten how good Michael Thomas is because of the fact that he hasn't been on the field for so long. And so I'm probably guilty in a lot of ways of doing the same thing I do with a lot of my fantasy teams, which is overlooking those health concerns and et cetera, and saying, but if they're good, I think New Orleans is probably a wild card team this year in the NFC, not just because of how weak the NFC is, but because I think there's a lot of talent to like on defense as well. Now, that being said, these numbers in particular, I'm going to pass on this game overall. 5.5 for where I see Atlanta is actually just about where I would have made this in the first place, considering where the game's being played. So no opinion in terms of a play, but overall, I have a feeling I'm going to have more Saints in the early weeks of the season than I think a lot of other people will.
Steven, if people listen to our Survivor breakdown video, of course, you can find that on the YouTube channel as well. If you're wondering where we were looking from a Survivor standpoint this week, I'm going to be on the Saints. I think that this is a spot where, from that type of contest perspective, that this is a really solid play for them, where I'm going to get leverage on the field because I'm using a team that, one, I think wins the game, and two, is not going to be one of the most popular picks out there. So if there are any upsets, hey, that works out great for me. And then also these teams that people are burning early on in the season, I still have in my pocket for later down the line. But from a side and things perspective, look, if I had to play this game, I'm playing the Saints for sure. I would be playing them as the favorites in this spot. Look, a good defense, mainly from a defensive standpoint for me, right? I mean, it's a really good secondary. The defensive line's really, really good as well. We know the offensive line for the Falcons not going to be great. Also, Marcus Mariota hasn't started a game in who knows how long, so it could be a little bit of a deal of some adjustment period for him. We know Drake London was banged up heading into this game anyway, so it's basically the Kyle Pitts show yet again. If you think Zacchaeus is out there and going to be lighting it up on the field all year long, well, yeah, you have a differing opinion than I do on all this. So again, I don't have an official play in the account, but it would certainly be a Saints or pass for me. I can't see myself back in the Falcons here in this spot.
Let's get our first game, and let's have our first lesson for the new listeners out there on trends with a Z instead of an S at the end here, Matt. because I want to know if this is real news or fake news. And we look into some of these. Most of them are absolute crap. I just saw an article Friday morning noting that the Bills won Thursday night, but the last Super Bowl champion to win on the opening night game wasn't since the Patriots in like 2004. There's a lot of absolute BS, non-actionable stuff out there. This one I want your opinion on. Since 2009, divisional home underdogs in week 1 are 19-5 against the spread. Now, I'm really asking hard here because we all agree the Falcons are one of the worst rosters in the NFL. But that just on its face as a starting point, does it hold water in your opinion?
Well, listen, I can get it from a familiarity standpoint, but like, what are they familiar with? I mean, this is, like Jameis Winston wasn't out there, but for a handful of games last year, there was no such thing as Chris Olave. There was no such thing as Jarvis Landry on this team. Michael Thomas didn't play on this team last year. Like, I mean, from a familiarity standpoint, I guess I can understand that, but what are they familiar with, right? And then on the Falcons side of things, it's a new quarterback, new weapons, new everything. I mean, like, so I guess I can get it as an overall type thing, you know, in a super, super macro standpoint. But Adam, for me, in this particular instance, where we're talking about two teams where, again, the Saints are basically a different team, you know, because of how they're made up for this season. And then, of course, it's a new look Falcons squad. I can't see anything that's actionable there.
Well, and let's add in the fact that we're also talking about an Atlanta team that is with a second-year head coach who was the play caller in Tennessee, but if you look inside what he did in the first year in Atlanta, he didn't call plays the same way in Atlanta as he did in Tennessee. It wasn't as heavy on play action. It wasn't as heavy on the run, and obviously it wasn't going to be as heavy on the run without Derrick Henry to some degree, but I don't know that we know a lot about either of these teams when it comes to talking about a familiarity standpoint and that trend that Steven mentioned. So, yeah, for me, both of these teams are wait-and-see teams when it comes to betting because there are just too many variables.
But Steven, I mean, listen, again, none of us have an official play on this, so I don't want us to like get too into the weeds on this. But it's just for me, just from a talent perspective. I mean, it's supposed to be one of the worst offensive lines in the league for the Falcons. It's supposed to be one of the worst defensive lines in the league. So Jameis shouldn't be pressured in this thing. I mean, like, look, if you want to poke holes in Jameis and things down the line, like I think that's perfectly fair. But I don't think this Falcons team's one to, you know, air quote expose Jameis in this offense or whatever here in week 1.
I agree with everything you guys said. I would never be interested in Atlanta in this spot. The Saints, to Adam's point, I agree with that. I could be interested in this squad. Full disclosure, I threw some lunch money on them at 50-1 to win the Super Bowl earlier this offseason just because when healthy, I think this is a playoff team, and I think the NFC is vulnerable, evidenced by one of the top projected teams getting their butts kicked on Thursday night to open the season in the Los Angeles Rams. But week 1, on the road, getting the worst of the number at this point after this opened at 3.5 for the Saints, and an offensive line that is average at best in the projections, and starting an FCS rookie at left tackle in Trevor Penning, and Jameis Winston once upon a time threw 30 interceptions in a single season. So let's just see how this plays out for the Saints first.